The prairie wind carried with it a lonely whistle, a sound that stretched across the wide open plains of the American frontier. It was the late 1800s, and the village on the edge of the wilderness was quiet, built from weathered wood and the defame, the stubborn hands of men and women who had little more than grit to keep them alive. Dust clung to the air, swirling between the small houses, the creaking saloon doors, and the narrow road that led into town. It was a place where survival was a daily struggle, where cattle and corn meant life or death, and where every man carried his story in the lines of his face. Yet, in this land of hardship and suspicion, one act of courage was about to unsettle the balance between the settlers and the people who had lived on that soil long before. The poor rancher was not the type of man who drew attention. He worked quietly on the edge of town, tending to a small stretch of land that was more stubborn than fertile. His cabin leaned a little too far to one side, his fence posts often gave way in storms, and his cattle were few and number-thin creatures that grazed on brittle grass. Folks in the village pitied him at times, though some whispered that he had chosen a cursed plot. Still, he kept to himself, showing up in town only when the flour sack ran empty or when he had to sell a few eggs at the market. He had little, but he worked hard, and in his eyes there was a steady light that no hardship could quite extinguish. On that fateful evening, the rancher was out near the creek that wound through his land. The sun was setting, burning the sky in shades of crimson and gold, when he heard something strange, a faint cry carried by the water. At first, he thought it was an animal caught in the reeds, but as he drew closer, he saw her. A young native woman lay half submerged, her clothes torn, her skin scratched, her breath shallow. She had clearly been through something dreadful, though the rancher could only guess what. For a moment, he froze. In those days, relations between settlers and the nearby tribe were tense, often edged with mistrust and fear. Bringing her into his home could mean trouble, yet leaving her there would mean certain death. He looked back toward his cabin, then to the horizon where smoke from the village chimneys rose faintly against the twilight. No one was around to see. His heart pounded, not from fear of her, but from fear of what might come after. Still, he could not walk away. Carefully, he lifted her out of the water, her weight surprisingly light in his arms. She stirred faintly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. He carried her back across the dry grass, every step heavy with the knowledge that his choice might alter everything he knew. Inside his cabin, he laid her on his bed, the only piece of furniture that was more than rough boards and nails. He stoked the fire, bringing warmth into the dim room, and cleaned the wounds on her arms with trembling hands. She winced at the sting of the water, but her eyes never opened. He didn't ask questions, he simply worked, wrapping her in a blanket and sitting beside her until sleep overtook him in his chair. Outside, the night grew dark, and the coyotes sang to the moon. By morning, word had already spread. The trader who passed his cabin early noticed the figure through the window. In villages like theirs, secrets were rare, and whispers traveled faster than the wind. Some folks wondered if the poor rancher had gone mad, taking in one of the very people others kept at arm's length. Others worried that the tribe would see it as an insult or worse, as a crime. By midday, more than one neighbor had come by, knocking on his door, trying to catch a glimpse inside. He said little, only that she was hurt and needed rest. But unease was growing, like a storm cloud building at the horizon. The rancher knew he couldn't keep her presence hidden for long. The woman stirred in and out of consciousness, sometimes whispering words in her own tongue, words he didn't understand but felt the weight of. He gave her water, bits of bread softened in broth, and prayed that strength would return to her. He thought of the risks. What if the tribe believed he had harmed her? What if the townsfolk accused him of crossing a dangerous line? He could feel the tension tightening around him, unseen but pressing from every side. That night, as the stars glimmered over the quiet prairie, the woman finally opened her eyes. They were dark and sharp, filled with both fear and strength. She looked at him for a long moment, and though no words were exchanged, something passed between them, a recognition that fate had bound them together, if only for a short time. She did not yet speak, but her eyes said enough. She knew she was in a stranger's home, yet she also knew she was safe. By dawn of the next day, riders were seen on the far ridge. The villagers gathered nervously in the square, murmuring that the tribe had been spotted moving closer, their horses kicking up dust in the distance. Some feared attack, others muttered that the poor rancher's choice had brought danger upon them all. The air was thick with dread, every creak of wagon, wheels, and every bark of a dog sounding sharper than usual. Mothers clutched their children tighter, men checked the rifles hanging above their doors, and the old preacher prayed aloud on the steps of the church. The rancher stood quietly at the edge of the road, his hat pulled low, his face calm though his heart thundered in his chest. He knew they were coming for her, and he knew there was no turning back from what he had done. The tribe would soon stand before him, asking questions he could not answer, demanding explanations he could not give. He had only his truth, that he had found her broken by the creek and had done what any man with a soul should do. Whether that truth would be enough to protect him, his land, or even the village itself was something no one could say. And as the riders drew closer, the people of the village fell silent, waiting to see if the rancher's simple act of mercy would bring peace, or open the door to a reckoning none of them were prepared for. The sound of hooves grew nearer, beating like a drum across the wide prairie. Dust rolled up behind the riders, painting the morning sky with a haze that carried both promise and dread. The townsfolk watched in silence, their faces pale, their hands tight around tools, rifles, or each other's arms. No one dared speak. Above a whisper, for everyone knew this moment could shift the balance between life and ruin. The poor rancher stood apart from them, a solitary figure with shoulders squared, though inside his chest his heart hammered harder than any galloping horse. He thought of the young native woman lying weak in his cabin, and he wondered if she realized how her presence had already stirred unease across the land. The riders slowed as they drew closer, their horses breathing heavy clouds into the cold air. They were not many, perhaps 6 or 7 men, but they rode with the weight of an entire people. Their clothes bore the dust of travel, their faces stern, their eyes fixed on the village. Every movement of the horses' reins, every jingle of leather straps seemed louder than it should. The rancher could feel the villagers' fear pressing against his back, though none of them dared step forward. It was clear they expected him, the man who had taken her in, to face whatever came. When the riders stopped, silence followed, heavy as stone. One of the men dismounted, his tall figure commanding without needing to raise a hand. His gaze swept the cluster of wooden houses, then settled on the rancher. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rancher tipped his hat, a small gesture of respect, though his throat felt dry as sand. The man before him did not return the gesture, but neither did he show anger. His eyes were sharp, searching, as if trying to read the truth before a single word was spoken. Behind the stillness, the villagers stirred uneasily. They whispered that trouble had come, that blood might soon be shed. Some looked toward the preacher, who clutched his Bible tighter, murmuring prayers. Others stole glances at the rancher's cabin, where a faint line of smoke curled from the chimney. Though the woman inside was unseen, her presence was felt by all. Like a spark hidden in dry grass. The man who had dismounted finally spoke, his voice low and measured, yet carrying enough force that every villager heard. He asked about the woman. The rancher swallowed hard, answering simply that he had found her by the creek, half dead, and that he had brought her in only to keep her alive. He added nothing more, for he knew that too many words could be as dangerous as too few. The silence that followed stretched painfully. The riders exchanged looks, their faces unreadable. One of them muttered something in their own tongue, and though the rancher could not understand, the tone carried weight. The villagers tensed, hands tightening on rifles, though none dared raise them. The air between the two groups felt like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap with the smallest wrong move. Finally, the tall man gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the rancher's words but not yet deciding what they meant. He swung back onto his horse, his eyes never leaving the rancher's face. Then, without warning, the riders turned and headed back toward the ridge, their figures shrinking against the horizon. The villagers exhaled as if they had been holding their breath the whole time. Relief flickered for a moment, but it quickly gave way to new fear. The tribe had not spoken their judgment, nor made their intentions clear. They had come only to look, and then they had gone, leaving behind a silence more unsettling than a threat. That night, the rancher sat outside his cabin, staring at the stars. Inside, the woman slept more peacefully than before, her strength returning bit by bit. He had managed to earn a fragile trust from her, though they still had not spoken much. She would open her eyes and watch him quietly, as if weighing his spirit before drifting back into rest. He wondered who she was, what had happened to her, and why the tribe had come without demand or anger. His land was quiet, but the quiet was not comforting. It was the kind that warned of a storm still. Waiting to break dot in the village, men argued over what should be done. Some wanted the woman returned immediately, fearing retaliation. Others said the tribe had no quarrel yet, and it was best to wait. The saloon buzzed with talk, voices rising in suspicion against the rancher, though none dared say it to his face. They called him foolish, reckless, or cursed, but none could deny that his choice had already bound the fate of the village to the outcome of a stranger's life. The preacher visited the rancher the following day, his boots crunching on the frost. Outside the cabin, he spoke gently, warning him that while kindness was noble, it could invite ruin if not tempered with caution. The rancher listened, nodding, though he offered little in reply. He did not regret saving the woman, though he knew the weight of it pressed not only on his shoulders but on everyone around him. The woman herself began to stir more often. She sat up slowly, her eyes sharp though her body still weak. She watched him with guarded silence, her hands gripping the blanket tightly whenever she sensed unease. One evening, as the fire crackled low, she spoke a few words in broken English. She thanked him, not with grand gestures, but with a voice soft and steady. Her tone carried dignity, a quiet strength that made the rancher realize she was not someone easily broken, no matter what had happened to her, but her words also deepened the mystery. She would not explain what had left her by the creek, nor why her people had come to the village. She said only that she would leave soon when her strength returned. Yet the rancher knew it was not so simple. Nothing about this land was ever simple. By the third day, the riders returned. This time, more of them came, their horses forming a line at the edge of the prairie. The villagers gathered again, uneasy, their nerves stretched thinner than before. The rancher stood quietly, his jaw set, as the tall man dismounted once more. But this time, he did not approach alone. Another figure rode with them, an elder, his presence commanding in a different way. His face carried the weight of years, his eyes calm but piercing. The elder did not speak right away. He stood before the village, letting silence work its power. Then he asked where the woman was. His voice was firm, not unkind, but heavy with expectation. The rancher answered again, his words simple. She was alive, recovering, and safe. The elder nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. Then he said that by tomorrow they would come for her. His words stirred the village like a spark thrown into dry straw. Some were relieved, glad the matter might soon be ended. Others whispered fear that the tribe's return in greater numbers meant something far more than a simple reunion. That night, the rancher lay awake, listening to the wind against the walls of his cabin. The woman slept, but unease twisted in his chest. He knew she would not be taken against her will, yet he also knew the tribe's intentions were hidden, cloaked in silence. He wondered what the next day would bring: gratitude, anger, or something neither he nor the villagers were prepared to face. And so, as dawn crept across the horizon, painting the plains in pale gold, the village braced for the return of the riders. Every heart beat heavy with the knowledge that by sundown, the fate of the rancher, the woman he had saved, and perhaps the fragile peace of the entire valley would hang on what unfolded next. The hoofbeats had not yet come, but already the air carried the weight of their approach. The rancher stepped outside, his hat low over his eyes, the rising sun casting long shadows across his land. Inside, the woman opened her eyes, her face unreadable, as if she too knew that the storm was coming, and somewhere on the ridge beyond, unseen by the village, the riders were already gathering. The morning sun spilled over the prairie in a wash of pale gold, but its warmth did little to ease the weight pressing on the village. By the time the smoke from breakfast fires drifted upward, men were already standing watch on porches and women whispered in doorways. The tribe would return soon, that much was certain. The riders had promised it, and promises on the frontier carried the sharp edge of fate. The poor rancher rose early, though sleep had barely touched him. His body felt heavy, but his mind had been racing all night. He stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching against the frost, and scanned the horizon. The woman he had saved stirred faintly inside the cabin, her face pale but her eyes sharper now than before. She had strength in her gaze even if her body had not yet caught up. She said nothing as he left her bedside, but her silence carried meaning. It was as though she, too, knew that the world was narrowing toward this one day. The rancher saddled his horse and rode into town. He could feel the eyes on him before he even reached the square. The blacksmith stopped hammering. The grocer paused as he stacked sacks of flour, and the old men outside the saloon set down their cards. Every look carried suspicion, some even anger. In their eyes he had brought this upon them. The preacher stepped forward, his hands clutching his worn Bible, and asked if he had considered what would happen if the tribe demanded more than just the woman. The rancher didn't answer. Words were not his strength, and besides, he wasn't sure himself. Inside the saloon, talk ran wild. Some said the tribe meant to take the woman back peacefully, but others claimed it was only a trap, a way to get close to the village before striking. There were whispers of old grudges, tales of skirmishes past, and stories twisted over the years until no one knew where truth ended and rumor began. Every man with a rifle polished it that morning. Every mother tucked her children deeper inside. The air in town was thick with a fear that no sunlight could chase away. The rancher left the murmurs behind and rode back toward his land. As he neared the cabin, he saw her standing outside for the first time, leaning weakly against the porch post. She was wrapped in a blanket, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Though her steps were unsteady, her presence was strong, as if the earth itself steadied her. She looked at him without fear. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it cut through the stillness. She said she knew they would come for her. She said she was ready. He wanted to ask her why she had been by the creek, what had brought her to such danger, but something in her eyes told him not to. The answers would come, perhaps not in words, but in whatever was about to unfold. He simply nodded. Though unease knotted his chest tighter. By midday, the riders appeared again on the ridge. This time, they were not 7 but nearer 20. their horses forming a line that rippled like a wave across the grass. The village bells tolled, calling people to gather, though none truly wanted to. Still, they came, forming a nervous cluster. Behind wagons and fences, staring across the distance, the tribe descended the ridge slowly, their approach steady, their intent unreadable. At their head rode the elder who had spoken before. His presence was calm, but it carried a power that made even the boldest men lower their voices. When they reached the edge of the village, the riders stopped, waiting in silence. The elder dismounted again, walking forward until he stood where everyone could see him. The rancher stepped up, the woman at his side, though she leaned lightly on his arm. A hush fell over the crowd. The elder looked at the woman first, his gaze softening, though his face revealed nothing else. Then he turned to the rancher, studying him as if weighing his soul. He spoke slowly, saying the woman was of his people, and she must return with them. He thanked the rancher for keeping her alive, but his words carried the heavy air of judgment, as though gratitude and suspicion lived side by side. He asked no questions of the villagers, only of the rancher. Why? Had he saved her? What did he expect in return? The rancher said what he had said before, that he had found her broken by the creek and had done what any man with decency should do. Nothing more, nothing less. His voice was plain, without polish, but it carried truth. The villagers shifted uneasily, waiting to hear how the elder would answer. Instead of replying, the elder turned to the woman and spoke in his own tongue. She straightened, her strength visible even through her weakness, and replied with words sharp and quick. No one else understood, but the exchange carried weight. The elder listened carefully, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. He turned back to the rancher and said the woman would speak for herself. The suspense hung thicker than ever. The woman looked at the rancher, her dark eyes steady, and in halting English she said she wished to return with her people. But she also said she owed her life to the man beside her, and that debt was not small. Her words stirred the riders, their faces shifting with murmurs. But the elder raised a hand and silence returned. The villagers thought the matter would end there, that she would ride away, and peace would return. But the elder did not turn to leave. Instead, he said her presence in the rancher's cabin had raised questions that could not be ignored. Questions about trust, about land, about the fragile line drawn between two worlds. He said they would return in days to speak further, and when they came back, decisions would be made that reached beyond one woman's life. With that, the riders departed, their silhouettes fading into the distance once more. The villagers exhaled. But no one felt relief. If anything, the uncertainty deepened. The saloon filled that evening with talk darker than before. Some men argued they should prepare for attack, that the tribe's words were only a mask for hidden plans. Others said the rancher had doomed them all, that his foolish kindness had opened a door that could never be shut. The rancher said little. He sat outside his cabin, listening to the coyotes call under the moon, while the woman rested inside. She was stronger now, her voice firmer when she spoke, but she said little of her tribe's words. She seemed caught between two worlds, herself bound by her people, yet tied by gratitude to the man who had saved her. In the days that followed, tension thickened like smoke. The rancher's neighbors grew cold toward him, some refusing to meet his eye, others muttering openly that he should have left her where she lay. Yet, in the quiet of his land, he found a strange peace in her presence. She moved slowly, tending the fire, mending what she could, and though few words passed between them, her silence carried more comfort than the village's noise. But beneath that peace, he felt the ground shifting. He could not shake the elder's words that choices larger than one life were at stake. He wondered what the tribe would demand, and whether the villagers would meet those demands with reason or with gunpowder. He feared both outcomes equally. Each evening, he looked to the ridge, half expecting to see riders waiting there in the twilight. Each morning, he wondered if this would be the day when silence finally broke into something far louder. The prairie was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that pressed against the chest, warning of thunder yet to come. And so the rancher, the woman, and the entire village lived in uneasy waiting, every hour stretched thin, every glance toward the horizon heavy, with questions no one dared answer. What the tribe sought, what the woman truly meant to them, and what place the poor rancher held in this widening circle of suspicion, these were truths still hidden. Like fire smoldering under ash. The storm had not yet arrived, but all could feel it building. And when it came, no man, no woman, and no village would remain untouched. The prairie seemed to hold its breath as the days passed. The tension between the rancher, the village, and the tribe grew heavier, hanging like storm clouds that refused to break. Each dawn brought nervous eyes to the ridge. Every sunset brought whispers of what might come with the next light. The air was alive with waiting, and waiting often proves the hardest burden of all. The woman had grown stronger, her steps more steady now, though her voice remained soft and deliberate when she spoke. She spent her mornings outside the cabin, standing near the edge of the pasture, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if she expected answers to rise out of the grass itself. The rancher often worked nearby, mending a broken fence or tending to his small herd, but his attention was never far from her. She had become the quiet center of a storm he could not control, and though he asked few questions, his thoughts burned with them. The village was restless. Men sharpened tools that hadn't been used in years. Rifles were checked and rechecked, and children were warned not to stray far from home. In the saloon, tempers grew short. One man argued that the tribe meant to take more than the woman, that they would claim land or cattle, perhaps even blood. Another said the rancher should hand her over without another word, for it was never wise to meddle in matters between people divided by such old lines. A third spat on the floor and muttered that no good deed went unpunished on the frontier. Preacher tried to calm the rising voices, reminding them that suspicion only fed the fire. But even he knew that peace balanced on a knife's edge, and a single wrong move could split it wide open. At night, he prayed on the church steps with his lantern burning low, asking that fear not blind the hearts of men. Still, doubt grew, thicker than his prayers could thin. The rancher heard the talk whenever he rode into town. He felt the stares, the whispered words that cut deeper than knives. Some blamed him for what was coming, saying his poor judgment had endangered them all. Others pitied him, seeing in his quiet face the weight of a burden too great for one man. Yet, no matter what was said, no one dared step into his shoes. They would not have carried the woman home from the creek. They would not have risked what he had. That much he knew. One evening, as the sky burned orange, the woman spoke more freely. She told him fragments of her story, her words broken but clear. She had been separated from her people, caught in a skirmish not of her making, left wounded and wandering until the creek became her last refuge. She did not say who had harmed her, though her eyes carried shadows that told enough. She said her people had feared the worst, and that was why the riders had come in such numbers. Her gratitude to him was real, but she also knew her return would not close the matter. Something larger had begun, something her people felt must be addressed with the settlers. The rancher listened, his hands rough from work resting still on his knees. He did not press her for more. He only nodded, though. Inside, unease settled deeper. He thought of the elders' words, of decisions yet to be made, and he wondered if the woman herself would soon be caught between her loyalty to her people and the bond born from his act of saving her by the fourth day. Scouts from the village reported movement on the ridge again. The tribe was gathering in greater force, more horses, more riders, more presence. The sight sent a ripple of fear through the settlement. Mothers rushed to pull their children indoors. Men argued louder, some calling for defense, others urging restraint. The blacksmith hammered out iron with nervous strength, making nails that no one asked for just to keep his hands busy. The saloon filled with whispers so sharp they cut through the clinking of glasses. The rancher stayed at his cabin that day, sharpening tools that did not need sharpening, his mind restless. The woman sat near the fire, her gaze thoughtful. At one point she turned to him and said softly that whatever happened, he must stand firm in his truth. Her voice carried both warning and comfort, and though he did not fully understand her, words settled into him like stone. That night, the wind howled across the plains, rattling windows and bending the tall grass flat against the earth. The village lights flickered in the distance, tiny sparks against the dark. The rancher lay awake, hearing the creak of the cabin and the faint sound of the woman's breathing. Sleep would not come. He knew tomorrow might bring the turning point, whether of peace or of ruin. At dawn, the tribe appeared again, this time in full strength. The riders stretched across the horizon, their presence too large to ignore. The villagers gathered nervously in the square, clutching rifles, tools, or each other's hands. Fear and defiance mingled in their eyes. The preacher stood with his Bible, whispering words of calm, though his voice trembled. The rancher led the woman forward, her step steady now, though her face revealed nothing. The elder dismounted once more, but this time he was not alone. Several leaders joined him, each carrying themselves with the authority of generations. They stood before the village, their silence heavy, their eyes sharp. When the elder spoke, his words carried deeper weight than before. He said the time had come for truth between the two peoples. He said the woman's survival was not just a matter of chance but of choice, and that choice had meaning. He turned to the rancher, his gaze piercing, and asked again why he had saved her. The rancher repeated his truth, his voice steady though the whole village held its breath. The elder listened, then said that while his words rang plain, plain words could hold deeper ripples. Saving her had tied him, and perhaps the whole village, to consequences not yet seen. The woman then stepped forward, her voice stronger than it had ever been. She spoke in her own tongue first, then in broken English, saying she stood between two paths, the bond of her people and the debt she owed the rancher. She said she would not see blood spilled for her life. Her words carried power, stirring both the riders and the settlers, though neither side knew what would follow. A silence fell so deep that even the wind seemed to pause. Every villager, every rider, every child hiding behind a door felt it. The prairie itself seemed to wait. The elder raised his hand, and in that moment the world felt balanced on its edge. The rancher stood firm, the woman at his side, the villagers trembling behind him, the riders watching with unreadable eyes. No one moved. No one breathed. The climax had not yet struck, but all knew it was near. The question was no longer if the storm would break, it was how, and what it would leave behind when it passed. The prairie waited, the sky held its breath, and the fate of the rancher, the woman, and the fragile bond between two worlds trembled in the silence before the first crack of thunder. The silence broke with the elder lowering his hand. The riders shifted, their horses stamping at the earth as if sensing the weight of the moment. The villagers tightened their grips on rifles and tools, their breath sharp in the morning air. The rancher stood still, his jaw firm, while the woman at his side held her chin high, her eyes locked on the elder. Then the elder spoke. His voice was calm but carried power that rolled across the square. He said the woman's life was her own, but the act of saving her bound not just one man but two peoples. He told the rancher that by choosing mercy, he had set a path that could not be walked alone. The tribe had seen the way she stood beside him, not as a prisoner but as a person with choice. That, he said, was something rare in a world where distrust had become more common than kindness. The villagers looked at each other, unsure. Some frowned, others looked down at their boots. The preacher stepped forward, his voice trembling but steady enough to carry. He said the elder spoke true, that mercy was not weakness but strength. And if the rancher's act was to be judged, it should be judged as noble. His words hung in the air, catching like sparks in dry grass. The woman spoke then, her English broken but her meaning clear. She said she wished to return to her people, but she would not forget the rancher who gave her life when death was near. She told the elder that no harm should come to him or the village, for his choice was not born of deceit but of honor. Her words brought a stillness, her voice bridging what no weapon could. The elder nodded slowly. He turned to his riders and gave a signal. They eased their horses, their shoulders softening. Then he looked at the villagers, his gaze sweeping over them like a wind across grass. He told them the tribe sought no war, but neither would they accept disrespect. He said trust was not given easily, but it had been shown here in small measure, and small measure was where peace must begin. The tension broke like a rope finally slackening. Villagers lowered their rifles, though unease lingered in their eyes. The tribe remained watchful, but no hands reached for weapons. The elder walked back to his horse, mounted with steady grace, and turned toward the ridge. The woman stepped to the rancher, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture both simple and full of meaning. She whispered her thanks, words soft but heavy, then turned and mounted behind one of the riders. The rancher stood silent, watching as the riders climbed the ridge and disappeared into the horizon. Dust rose and drifted away, leaving the land quiet once more. The villagers murmured, some in relief, some in bitterness, but none in open anger. The preacher bowed his head, whispering a prayer of thanks that no blood had stained the soil that morning. In the days that followed, life in the village slowly returned to its rhythm, though the air was never quite the same. The saloon was quieter, the whispers less sharp. The blacksmith hammered again, though his blows carried thought as well as strength. Mothers let their children play farther from home, though they watched the ridge more carefully. The rancher returned to his land, his days filled with work, his nights with silence. He thought often of the woman, of her strength, of her eyes that held both gratitude and sorrow, of the way she had stood between two worlds without fear. He knew he might never see her again, but he carried her presence with him like a mark etched deep. The villagers' suspicion toward him softened, though it never vanished entirely. Some still called him reckless, but others began to see him as something more, someone who had chosen humanity when fear could have ruled him. The preacher visited often, bringing bread or sharing quiet conversation. He told the rancher that sometimes one act of mercy could ripple farther than 100 acts of anger. The rancher listened, nodding, though he was a man who measured truth by deeds rather than words. Weeks later, when the prairie turned green with spring, riders appeared once more on the ridge. But this time they did not come with silence or suspicion. They came with a single gesture. The woman rode at their side, her posture tall, her eyes calm. She did not stop in the village, nor did she return to the rancher's cabin. She only raised her hand in greeting from afar before turning and vanishing again into the wide land. It was enough that the villagers talked less of war after that. They still feared the tribe, still guarded their land, but something had shifted. They knew peace was fragile, but they also knew it was possible, if only for a while. The rancher worked his land, his cabin standing quiet and steady by the creek. When he passed the villagers in town, their nods were less cold, their eyes less sharp. A few even tipped their hats first. The woman's presence lingered in memory like the sound of a distant song. She had come into their lives like a shadow at dusk, bringing fear, suspicion, and questions no one wished to face. But she had left behind something different, an understanding that even in a hard land, mercy could change the shape of a story. The rancher often sat outside at dusk, watching the prairie stretch into the horizon. He thought of her sometimes, wondering if she thought of him. He wondered if their paths would ever cross again, but he knew it was not important. What mattered was what had already been written, that on a land where steel and suspicion often spoke louder than kindness, he had chosen otherwise. And that choice had not been in vain. The village learned to live with the memory of that winter, carrying it like a scar, visible but healing. The tribe kept their distance, but the air between them and the settlers carried less bitterness. The elders' words had taken root, reminding all that trust begins small and grows only if tended. Years later, when children asked their fathers about the day the riders came, they were told not of war but of the man who chose to save instead of leave behind. The tale grew, as tales often do, shaped by time and voice, but its heart remained. And at its heart was the truth that even the poorest man, with nothing more than a cabin and a patch of land, could change the course of fear with a single act of mercy. The prairie rolled on, seasons shifting, storms passing, grass bending in the endless wind. The cabin by the creek remained, its smoke rising steady against the wide sky. The rancher's life was still hard, still marked by work and silence, but it carried a weight of meaning he had never sought yet could never forget. In the end, the story was not one of war, nor of victory, nor of loss. It was a story of choice, of what one man decided to do when faced with fear, and how that choice echoed far beyond his own life. It was a story of a woman who stood between two worlds, a village caught in doubt, and a people who carried both pride and pain. And it was a story of a land that tested all who lived upon it, teaching them that peace, like the prairie itself, was wide, fragile, and worth holding on to even when the storms gathered. And so the tale closed, not with thunder, but with quiet that held within it the memory of struggle, the weight of mercy, and the hope that even in a land of dust and division, humanity could endure.